Welcome to Galactic Racers, and we have a great race for you today. The contestants are making their way to the start line. Who are you waiting for? Bully Bullhorn? Perhaps Attica, the rank outsider? Sonic in pole position? Or perhaps Bob Jester, yet to finish a race? The flag wavers are clearing the track, and they're off! We have an early lead from Bully Bullhorn, but the others are fast behind. Oh, Attica's catching him up. Will this pit stop by Bob Jester losing the race? No! Attica crosses the finish line first and the crowd go wild. And now let's peek behind the scenes. I started with the racers using Blender. Now Blender's a free, incredibly powerful 3D design program, but it is quite a learning curve. But once you've mastered it, you can create designs like these. I planned to do about 8 races, but they were taking so long I whittled it down to 4. I started off with Bob, because I'd already done his engine just years ago for fun, and eventually ended up with these 4, 2 classics and 2 slightly less well-known ones. So with my designs done, I printed them. Now I designed them originally for FDM and printed them at 0.1, and they're fine, they don't need any cleanup. But I also then I eventually got someone to pre-support for me because their supports are way better than mine, and printed in resin. Now I tried to use a really flexible resin for the connectors. It was a little bit too flexible for the stands, as you can see, so I actually used FDM for them. So you need to pick your resins to make sure they've got enough flex to be useful, but not too much flex that nothing stands up. And then I just clean them up using wet sanding to avoid too much dust with emery boards, metal files and despise banding sponges. I find it really hard to see the clear resin though, so I spray painted everything with Tamiya Fine Grey and filled any issues that I had. The pieces fit together using clips or sometimes just friction, and it makes it very easy to put them together and take them apart again, which is great when painting. With the prep over, it's time to give my bins another coat of paint. Yes, I'm outside painting. Now, I decided to use spray paints for all of this for speed, and because quite frankly I need to change the filters on my airbrush bead and I just couldn't be bothered to do it. I have a lot to paint because not only have I got the racers, I've also got miniatures and terrain, and you can see them in the background in some of these shots. So I started off doing the racers with a zenithal highlight. If you don't know what that is, I'm going to use speed paints, sometimes called contrast paints, in a minute to paint them. And they work best over a base of white. And if you want to add shadows in, if you spray black and then spray white from above, you get a very heavily shadowed effect. And here come the speed paints. Most of the markings, etc., are already modelled in, so it's actually very easy to paint these. All I needed to do was add some silvery colour. This is broadsword silver, but I've also got a much more polished silver in some places. And then to paint all of the bright colours on for the paint jobs. Now I chose to use close to the originals on the resin prints and somewhat slightly off the originals with the FDM prints. I can always tell which is which because the resin prints are on rocky bases and the FDM prints are on sandy bases. A few little touch-ups with white where I'd spilled over, and then I was able to use a Molotow chrome pen to just add a little bit of scratching. You really could go to town on the weathering though. One weathering technique I did use though was a wash. I practically put a wash on everything. And for this, I use Starship Filth. It's an oil paint in odourless spirits, and then I just brushed it on everywhere. Just the last few details to paint. These are the power couplings, and I'm doing them in fluorescent magenta by Vallejo. I got this pigment off eBay, and I think it's for like nails or something. It's certainly not for doing models with. And what I wanted to use it for was the light splash from the pink glow from these neon power couplings. I also wanted it to just pep up the colour density. I could have put 2 or 3 coats of paint on. Instead, I use this pigment and it really wows. It does die down a bit when you varnish it, but it still looks great. Pigments are also great for adding on the sort of jet engine stains and vent marks and all of that exhaust stuff. And I use Black Smoke from MIG Productions for that. I took the engines off the bases, everything's just clipped, so I could take them outside and spray paint them just like all the terrain. Once everything was together, the bases got the same finishing treatment that I'd put on the terrain, which is a bit of beige target over the top to give it a bit of a dusty feel. And to fix it, eventually I'll use varnish, but for now I just use isopropyl alcohol and water. It sprays, it fixes it enough to handle in the short term, but it isn't great for playing with later. Do you want to make your own pod race? Then you can by going to the Galactic Racers Kickstarter that's running now. All of the STLs for these races, minis and terrain are available for you to print at home. So pop on over now, there's only a couple of weeks left. But before we can use our racers, they need pilots. Now again, these started in Blender. I've designed these from scratch. I did a whole live stream on how I designed one of them if you want to know more details. Cleanup was thankfully very minimal, and then it was straight onto a zenithal highlight. If you remember, this is a black base coat and then white sprayed from above. Then just like the racers, it was onto the speed paints. Now some of them, like these repair droids, are just one colour, so they're really speedy to do. They are sadly, I think, just a bit too intense. I do think speed paints can be, and you can dilute them out with water or speed paint medium if you really want to thin them down to get a less saturated result. But whichever way you do it, they're certainly very quick to do. Once the one colour minis were done, it was time to move on to the more complicated pilots. Now these minis, I do love them. Hi Bob. They're great fun. I only did one coat of speed paint though. I didn't go through and add any highlights. I didn't even really do many eyes. So it was very speedy. And I think it shows. You really should spend perhaps a little bit more time than I did, but if you're not confident about painting, you can see just how easy it is to do a zenithal prime, add on a speed paint and get a really good result. I'd already painted the bases using the spray paints for the terrain, so I just glued on my minis. I did add the dust coat to these and fix them with a careful spray of isopropyl alcohol and water. More about that when I talk about the terrain, because that did come back to bite me. If you want to try one of the miniatures for free, then check out the free gift that's on the Kickstarter page. You'll find the link for the Kickstarter down below and you'll get this cute little guy. And what's more, there's also a crashed, this is Crossonics, crashed engine for you to print. So go check it out and get your free gifts now. And I also need your help in unlocking these walls as part of one of the social stretch goals. It's views on the pitch video. So if you haven't seen the pitch video, when you finish this one, go check it out. There's a link down below. Once we get to 2,000 views, the walls will become part of the Kickstarter. And now onto the bit I probably love best, and that's terrain. I love doing terrain and scenery. It's where I started really. And I designed my terrain for FDM printing. Why FDM? Well, these are big, I want to clip them. FDM's cheaper and more robust in these sizes. You can help get rid of layer lines by just printing in finer layers like 0.08 or 0.1, but I did these in 0.2 for speed. I wanted to do an experiment on how to fill those layer lines using spray stone texture. I've used it in other projects in before, it works quite well and it should just cover the layer lines. So this first building is being done in spray putty as a control. This is what I would normally do. Now spray putty is available in Europe very easily, certainly in the UK. In North America you need to use, apparently, filler primer instead. It just needs a few extra coats. The second building is being sprayed with stone textured paint. It's one I already had in my paint rack. And I realised why I'd never used it before. It's absolutely gross. It's like spraying wet toilet roll. In fact, it reminds me of the walls on public toilets in the UK. It went on really badly and left loads of areas where it just sort of bounced itself off the plastic. And really, I had to put on 2 coats to get it even. It also spattered all over the one next to it. It wasn't easy to go on. It was just too big a texture. But I've had great success in the past, and in the past I've used Desert Bisque or Aged Iron if I'm doing tarmac by Rust-Oleum. They're exactly the same looking paint can, but there's slight differences. So I tried again with their Natural Effect Limestone. This is much finer, much finer, but at least it goes on looking like stone. It just doesn't cover the layer lines as much. So let's take a quick sneak peek ahead to how they turned out. We have the hideous to spray stone on the left, the middle has had nothing done to it, and the right hand side is the limestone. Sad to say, I don't think the really nasty to spray stone came out as badly as I expected. It's probably a little out of scale though. The do nothing is a valid technique. You can see some layer lines, but actually the worst one for layer lines is almost the limestone. I just don't think it had enough body to it, but I didn't do all the spray painting for this one. I just sprayed it limestone, then wash. So it was a lot quicker to do. So stone textures absolutely do cover layer lines well. You just need to find the right can. Everything else got one coat of Motip spray putty just to help with the layer lines. I wanted a dark base colour, and the only one I had was this Cobra Antico. It's like a terracotta colour. It's actually great for brickwork. And a quick tip. This contraption that fits on the end of a drill is really good for making shaking cans really quick. They still need a normal up and down shake, but this will take minutes off your shaking time. Not all my items though want to have that darkish base coat, so I used Desert, aptly named by Cobra, for these pit stop buildings. They sit behind the pit stop. Sadly, I didn't have enough of this because it's a nice light colour, so the buildings had to get done in a different darker colour called Sand. Still using up extras, this is Montana chocolate white. You need to really shake this and never put the first bit of any Montana bottle directly on your model. With all my base coats done, everything's now got a colour on it, but it's a bit flat. I'll add a wash in a minute, but first I wanted to use spray paints as a highlight, especially from the top down, to show bleaching out on some of these buildings. To be honest, they just look too dark. So this is Montana Sahara Beige. It's actually the B1 battle droid colour that they used in Star Wars, and that's what I bought it for. And I had a lot of cans of it, so I did use it quite liberally to lighten up these buildings and the rocks and everything else really that was already red. It's also really good at dirtying down these whitish stands. Time for the wash. Now washes bring models to life. And I'm doing this outside because I'm just spraying on a brown acrylic wash. The only danger is these have layer lines because they're FDM prints, and sometimes your wash can really sit and just highlight your layer lines. So if they're still really visible, this isn't a great technique. But right now it worked well, except if you look at the left-hand building, you can see I didn't really mop it up well enough, and on the one I'm spraying right now, it sort of pooled around one of the top edges quite badly. And that's on me for not spending enough time checking it as it dried to make sure that I didn't get anything nasty staying behind. But the trouble with acrylic washes over the oil washes we saw on the racers is once they're dry and they're really hard to shift. When the wash dried on these buildings that are supposed to be a bit paler, it looked blotchy, it looked awful. So I went for a kind of cover it up plan. This is Motip Spray White, and I used it on my first Kickstarter, which was modular landing pads. Sadly, it's really thin and I oversprayed, so it ran a lot on those and caused me a bit of a headache. But for here, its thinness is really good because it's just acting like a glaze. Now, if you sprayed it enough times, it would come out as a white. But for now, I'm using it like a glaze over the brown, splodgy acrylic wash just to tone everything down. And it works really well. Time to use my favourite product, Tile Grout. It's so much cheaper than the pigments you get in little bottles, and it's great for adding dusty coats onto big terrain pieces like this. I use it just like a pigment. I just literally brush it on. I did use some pigments. These are original MIG production pigments I've had for, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 years. And this is Industrial City Dirt. It's one of my favourites. And I used it to do the streaking on the buildings. Now look at the size of that pot and look at the bag that you get for Tile Grout. I know the prices aren't quite comparable, but definitely when you're throwing a lot of powder around to put on dusty effects onto terrain, definitely go Tile Grout. Now I will varnish these to really fix them, but for a short-term fix, I used isopropyl alcohol and water. It makes it touchable by hand and it looks great for the photos for my Kickstarter. But I didn't think this through. I have one piece that I had painted. It's a terrain piece and it just went wrong. This is the pit stop piece that goes with the terrain set. And I've painted it like everything else, but I use speed paints to do the details. And apparently the one I used on the wall, which is a brown, and the one I used on the hoses, which is a red, they run when they get wet with isopropyl alcohol and water. Oops. Just the minis I spent all that time painting didn't seem to run. The moral of this story is, if it's raining and you don't want to varnish but you want to fix your stuff, just don't wait for it to stop raining and varnish. It would have been a lot safer. With the racers, minis and terrain done, it was time to film. Now for this, I'm using some really high-tech stuff. I have got a green screen with my terrain in front of it, and then I literally just push my racers, which are sat on a box, on a skate. It's like a roller skate for cameras. All I have to do is disappear the green in my video editing software and then bring in a picture behind it, merge them together, crop and speed up. And now a little chat about the Kickstarter. All of these models, the racers, the miniatures and the terrain, are part of the core sets in my latest Kickstarter, Galactic Racers. So if you want to recreate a scene like this, then pop on over to Kickstarter. There's links in the description and there'll be a card, and sign up now. There's only a couple of weeks left and then the prices go up. I hope you enjoyed the video and I'll see you next time.